former journalist, author and media specialist Lesley Mofokeng is a popular culture commentator for radio and television and has worked for South African publications. Well, he's released his new book. It's titled The Man Who Shook Mountains, in the Footsteps of My Ancestors. His book looks into the life of Mongangane Wilfred Mofokeng, a well-known evangelist for the Dutch Reformed Church. Mongangane set out to establish a community at a dusty cattle post in the far northwest province in the 1950s, when black South Africans were being driven out of the cities and forced to live in reserves and homelands. Lesley Mofokeng is here to join us to tell us more about his book and what this book is about. Lesley, good morning. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Talk to us about this book. And I feel like, given the amount of time you spent in the industry, this was a long time coming. Tell us a little bit about and how you arrived at this stage of your career.
Absolutely. I've been flirting with the idea for many, many years. While my grandfather was still alive, I had started documenting pieces here and there of his life story until I went to Wits University to do my master's degree.
Yes.
And when I got there, I was given an option, obviously, to do research. And I had no idea of what to do, really. I quickly remembered that I have a story of my grandfather that I never explored,
yes,
that I don't have details of. And that's how the book came into being.
Yeah.
I presented the idea in the class, they loved it. My supervisor, Kevin Davey, was very supportive, and the entire team really adverts.
Yeah.
And I set off to research my grandfather, started with the interviews with lots of people in a place called Gelexpan, which is in the Ditsobotla district in Northwest. My youngest person to interview was probably 60 and the oldest was about 90.
Right.
I compressed the life story of my grandfather from 1914 to 1984. But also in the book I talk about the history of Bafokeng, my people, my ancestors, taking it back to the 1600s. People need to know that there was history before Mushweshwe,
yes,
even. And one of my direct ancestors, Nkejani, was actually the dominant sort of ruler of that area,
yes,
that we call Lesotho today. It was actually known as Lesotho la Nkejani. It's all in the book.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the title, The Man Who Shook Mountains, in the Footsteps of My Ancestors. What's the inspiration behind the title?
The original title of this book was Muruti wa Sekuta.
Right.
Because my grandfather used to walk around or travel around the area of Gelexpan and the surrounds on a scooter.
Yes.
And became a permanent sort of fixture, an exciting fixture on the landscape. But when I got to my publisher listened to one of the interviews that I had. And one of these elders from church said that right. And she liked that expression, to shake mountains. And said, this is the man who shook mountains. And looking at the trajectory of his life, he really shook mountains.
Yeah.
And that's how we ended up with the title. But also, the last chapter of this book is written on top of Tababusiu.
Right.
I spent some time in Lesotho, about a week, traveling between Morija and Tababusiu doing research. And we all know the landscape of Lesotho is dominated by mountains. So the idea was that I was shaking mountains for answers about my identity, about my history, about my legacy, and where I come from. And
that's so significant because, and you say it's the last chapter that you wrote there. Do you think he had something to do with it? With you being in that space at that time when you're finally closing this journey?
You know, it's interesting. The first chapter of the book is written from the church that he built in 1956 in Gelexpan, that's still standing. And I go in there and look at how it has lost its shine, let me put it that way.
Yeah.
And the entire complex, not just the church, he actually built a hospital called Gelexpan Hospital,
yes,
still standing to this day, and several churches and schools. He was just a community builder. So I go and retrace his steps and I see all of this disrepair and it breaks my heart. But I mean, it's the first chapter. And then I carry on with the book to the last chapter, which is now me reconciling this history of church,
yes,
and my roots as a Mosotho. And what better place than Tababusiu? This is where King Mushweshwe, 200 years ago in 1824, made this fortress, the foundation of Basotho. This way he created the Basotho nation. It's 200 years of the Basotho nation next year. And also, this is where the missionaries first arrived,
yes,
in 1833 to civilize Basotho. And it's the root of Christianity in Lesotho and the Basotho nation. So it made sense for me to end up in Thaba Bosiu and retrace the step and go walk in the footsteps of my ancestors.
Yeah. What lessons came with working on this particular book, and what did it teach you about stuff you thought you knew about him but you didn't quite know?
Wow. Well, at the end of the day, my grandfather, there's no doubt that he was a great man.
Yes.
But I didn't set out to create a book about the great man.
Yes.
I wanted an assessment of his life, the choices that he made. He was the first one to be literate in the family. In one generation, he produced an Ivy League graduate, my uncle, who is a Princeton University graduate, and also holds a doctorate from Notre Dame University in the Netherlands. So it tells the story of this family that looked at education as a way out of poverty. My grandfather grew up on the farms in the Free State. Had it not been for education, I might have been a farm laborer in the Free State myself.
Yes.
So he turned his life around and made something of himself. And these choices that he made are still influencing us, are still reverberating in our lives until now. So I learned that he, as much as he was a great man, there are some choices that he made. It's all in the book. There are choices that he made that I question.
Yeah.
There are things that people question about choosing religion over tradition, for example.
Yes.
The fact that he chose the church over, I don't know, something to do with tradition like lebollo or what we call initiation,
Right, yeah.
and all of those things. But overall, it's a picture of a man that really made something of himself. And I'm very proud of him, and I'm very happy, and I hope that he sees that the world now is talking about his life story. By the way, even at the hospital that he built, his name is not written. There's not a ward, there's not a street, there's not a corner that honors Mongangane Wilfred Mofokeng.
Yeah.
Despite of all the things that he did in that community, his name is not there. But I believe that with this book, his story will travel far and wide, better than a statue being erected in his honor. Yeah.
You also touch on an incident in history about the church as well. Tell us a little bit about
Yes,
that.
there's a very interesting history about Kerk Yafora, or what you call the Dutch Reformed Church. The book, yes, I belong to the Dutch Reformed Church. I still go to it's now called the Uniting Reformed Church. I attend the one in Alexandra, that's my home congregation. And I'm still a staunch member of the church. But we needed to tell this story of our churches as black people. As much as I do family history preservation with the book, but I also talk about the history of the church. So I take it back to a massacre called the Beersheba Massacre of African Christians that happened in about 1858, where about 2,000 Christians were killed brutally by Boers who were traveling from the Cape inland. This was a citadel of excellence. It was run by a missionary called Samuel Roland.
Yes.
They had churches, they had printing presses, they were translating the Bible, they were composing hymns, they were publishing books, they were publishing a newspaper called Moboledi wa Ditaba. So all of this shows that there was excellence, black excellence, as far back as the 1850s. And this did not sit well with the Boers who were traveling at that time. Read about that massacre and understand how the Kerk Yafora, which means the Church of the French,
yes,
became the Dutch Reformed Church, which is now the Uniting Reformed Church. I don't want to give away a lot in the book,
yes,
because there is so much more that we can learn, and you can make sense and you can connect the dots yourself when you read the book and see how far we've come with religion as African people. At the end of the day, this is my provocation to Africans and to Christians and non-Christians, by the way. It's a book about identity, to assess where we come from. I use my grandfather's story and the church story to kind of question some of the things that we've accepted for so long. Like the hymns that we sing. I've got a whole chapter about hymns and what they say. They were written by white French men. We sing these songs today, it's Easter Sunday. But do we know who wrote those songs or those hymns and what influenced them? So I do make an appraisal here and there of some of the hymns. You can read for yourself in the book and see if you agree with me or not. But it's a whole new kind of way of looking at religion. And there's not a lot of books about that. About our religion, about our identity as Africans. And I urge everyone, really, whether you're religious or not, read the book and understand where we come from as Africans.
You know what? I'm happy that you had to do this chapter of your life. Thank you so much, Lesley. Thank you for talking to us. Lesley Mofokeng, on his book, The Man Who Shook Mountains in the Footsteps of My Ancestors. He says here, Bongani Matondo says, says, beyond the sweeping historical travelogue critique of the empire and black men's conflicted roles with it, all told in the Basotho's art of oral exaltation, the story reads like a village hymn. And those are some of the things that he highlights in this book. Congratulations there to Lesley Mofokeng.